Today, I welcome back on Adversity to Strength Natasha Layton for part two of this conversation. We continue our powerful discussion, focusing more deeply on her lived experience growing up inside the FLDS cult led by Warren Jeffs. In this episode, Natasha takes us further inside the reality of cult life, psychological control, enforced obedience, fear, and silence that shaped every aspect of her childhood. She speaks candidly about indoctrination, modesty rules, family separation, and long term trauma that comes from having your identity stripped away in the name of faith and authority. We explore what it truly takes to leave a cult, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically, and the complex process of rebuilding a sense of self after years of control and manipulation. Natasha also reflects on the grief, anger, and confusion that surface long after escape and the courage required to speak out publicly about experiences many still struggle to name. This is a difficult but essential conversation about coercive control, survival, reclaiming autonomy, and a reminder of how resilience is forged not just to escape, but in the slow, brave work of healing afterward. Natasha, it's brilliant and great to see you on the podcast again. Thanks for coming back for the second part.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you listening and just so very honored to be here.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed, as much as I enjoyed our conversation. It's just like some of it was like mind boggling, and then some parts of it was actually quite amusing, bearing in mind the severity of what's going on there. But you're still trying to I'm still trying to comprehend the conversation and listen to how a cult works there as well. And there's no way we could have fitted your story in one episode. It just wouldn't have done it justice there as well. So I appreciate you coming back on for the second part, and I'll just leave it with you to take us through to the second part, because I know there's so much there that you've been through, and a lot of it's quite heavy there as well. But I appreciate you coming back on.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we left off, it was a lot of backstory of what
Yeah,
the FLDS is and the background behind that. And specifically within my family, I thought, I knew my childhood wasn't great, but I didn't realize how awful it truly was until I grew up and I started telling people my story, and they're like, that's not normal, right? But the first time I really truly experienced how awful it was is when I started having the flashbacks when I was 14 about my older brother sexually abusing me as a child. And then it was a solid, I don't know, it was a year before I told my parents. They did not offer any support at all with that. And I was just left to deal with that pain and trauma on my own. And that brought on a lot of internal shame and anger within myself, because I thought, I brought it on myself, but I was 3 and 4 years old. How could a child have brought that onto herself? And so it was a lot of internal just shame and anger that really still to this day affects me. And even though I've spent years off and on in therapy, but when I really realized for the first time how awful it was as I was telling my best friend about that, being abused. I was telling her that, just all these awful things and we had been best friends, I think, for about 5 years at that point. We were 16 and we're sitting in a park, and I was telling her, and I realized for the first time it was so awful because I couldn't even cry for myself. She was crying for me. Like, I couldn't even cry, telling her all these awful things, and she was just weeping. And she's like, Natasha, you have no idea how strong you are. And that's really where it started, where people just kept telling me how strong I am. And sometimes I get really tired of hearing it because it's exhausting,
it
to
is
be perfectly
exhausting.
honest. Having
I'm
to be
with you there.
strong all the time when I just want to heal. And I thought that for the longest time, I thought that healing was like, I'm going to work through all my stuff and then I'll be on the other side of it and then I'm going to be fine. And healing it's forever.
Yeah.
It's
Eh,
Yep, it doesn't stop, and it's
yeah.
exhausting, especially when I have, now five brothers that have taken their lives by suicide.
Yeah.
Uh,
First on that, obviously being a survivor of child sexual abuse myself, it is exhausting. And when you're told you're strong and you've done this, that it's just mentally draining. I don't know about yourself. For me, I wake up some mornings and I'm like, I've got no energy. You feel like a shell. And sometimes you're like, how on earth am I going to get this energy together to get through the day, that kind of thing. And you're always working on yourself. You just are. Is that kind of
mhm.
similar for yourself?
Yep, actually, I had just earlier this week, I had to show up to work 2 hours late because I just was exhausted,
Yeah.
and I'm still in less than a year out from the most recent suicide within my family. And so it's mentally exhausting. And then as I've started to share my story more and more, it brings up a lot, and it is very exhausting and draining on my body. But as I've realized, me telling my story is helping other people. I'm getting
Yeah.
messages almost on the daily through various social media channels, mostly through TikTok because that's the one I'm most active on. But just people telling me, thank you so much. I relate to your story. And
Yeah.
then they'll tell me about their own experiences, so then I'm taking on other people's traumas as well, which again, I don't take that lightly. That is an honor. A lot of people don't even tell others. Like somebody just today, she's like, there's only two other people in this world that know about it, and you are now the third.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a great, it's an honoring place and humbling place to be, but also very heavy. My
Yes.
co-host on my podcast, the Survivors podcast, my co-host is Lisa.
Yeah.
She's a crisis counselor for the
Yeah.
Trevor Project, which they
Yeah.
basically are the counselors that for the 988 here in America, it's called 988. You can call that. And she volunteers for that. And so she's actually helped me a lot. She's like, you got to kind of protect yourself and not take too much on, because as you're in, as I'm realizing, yes, I am a mental health advocate, and taking that on, I have to learn to protect myself in the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to protect yourself there as well. With my clients, I would say three-quarters of them have been through CSA. So, listening to their story, often I'm the only person that they've ever spoken to. So it is an honor, but you have to be mindful of how you manage it and deal with that. You've been through so much. With your parents, what was their reaction then? Just to brush it off? Was it just denial when you tried to speak to them? Because that takes a lot for a child to actually tell their parents what's happened.
Yeah, it was. I had been having the flashbacks for a year, and I had become suicidal. And I was 15 when I finally did tell them, and they just sat there and just stared at me. And they were asking me, well, were you scared? What was going on? Where were you? Where did this happen? And just they were shocked because Marcus was the golden child and he was just the perfect child. He was never did anything wrong. He was actually still in the FLDS church at this point. We left in 1997 when I was 12, and he chose to stay in because he believed that's where he was meant to be. And so we didn't really, so by now, I'm 15, so I hadn't seen him for a number of years. And so I didn't have much interaction with him, which I'm so very grateful for. My dad did call him. So the night that I told my parents, I'm sitting there just soaking wet with just sobbing. And my dad says to my mom, Sherry, go comfort your daughter. Like she couldn't even be there for me. And so she came and sat by me and she was hugging me and trying to comfort me, I guess the best she could. It didn't really feel very genuine or sincere. So I went to bed, and the next day my dad called Marcus and asked him about it. And by then Marcus had been in an arranged marriage through Warren and had already had a couple of children by then. And he admitted to it. And my dad told him to write me and my mom an apology letter. Why my mom needed one, I don't know. A few weeks later, it came in the mail. I come home from school and my mom says, your letter from Marcus is right there. I saw my letter and her letter. I never read hers. I went downstairs and I read the letter. I actually found it. I was going through all my stuff as I'm preparing to write my book, and I found the letter. But I never forgot one thing that he said in it. It seared into my brain. He said, we both know there was no real damage done because he didn't grate me. Can I say the word?
Go for it.
Because he didn't rape me or penetrate me with his penis. In his mind, there was no real damage done. Yeah. And so I was just left. My mom never asked me about the letter. It was never spoken about again. It was just became a dirty family secret that I was left to
Yeah.
deal with. And I asked my parents repeatedly for help to get therapy, and I was just ignored.
What'd they
And
say? Just brushed it off.
yeah, yeah. I had actually found another letter that I had written to my parents. I did this a lot, and the teenager and in my 20s, I would write letters, to people because it just helped me get my message
Yes.
across
Yeah.
without, you know what I mean? And so I found this letter that I had written to my parents. I was 16 years old. I was apologizing for something that I had done. I don't remember what it was, but in the end of the letter, it said, I'm going through a lot. There's a lot going on within in me, and you will never understand because you didn't have to experience those things. I have spoken to the bishop because we're trying to, after we left our FLDS, we tried to assimilate into mainstream Mormon church. And I had spoken to the bishop, who was actually a pediatrician, and he believed that I need therapy. And I said that in the letter. I said, I've spoken to the bishop. He believes that I need therapy as well. Again, like asking for help and just ignored, completely ignored as a 15, 16-year-old child.
Yeah, unfortunately, I get it as a therapist and somebody that's studied it and somebody that's been through it. Like my mum is, which I don't even call her, I call her Rita because she's not fit to be a mother. The things that I would tell her, she would just brush it off, would never take any accountability, would never admit what it was. Even when my stepfather was sent to prison for childhood sex offences, she could never bring herself to say what he was. She'd have to say, call him a pervert. That's all she could do. Just in absolute denial, will not accept anything, any accountability, any responsibility for anything there as well. And it's frustrating. And they would just tell themselves a story. Oh, it probably wasn't that bad. It was this, yeah, exaggerate. All the things that they can try and justify themselves for not supporting there as well. And how did you feel when you thought, do you know what? Nobody's going to help me on this.
I felt absolutely hopeless and alone. And I I started keeping a journal at 12 and going back and reading my journal. I had been apparently suicidal from the time I was 11, had been thinking about it. My first time that I actually put in, I was when I was having the really heavy flashbacks at 15, and I was had a knife to my wrist, and I ended up calling, the knife wasn't sharp enough. But also I was grappling with, because we were raised that if you take your own life, you're going to go to hell, because that's what we were told growing up. If you take your own life, you're going to go straight to hell. And so even though we were out of the cult, those things are still,
We've got the
they're
beliefs.
ingrained because you're taught that from birth, and it's just becomes part of your DNA. So I called my sister, and I told her about what Marcus had done, and she urged me to tell my parents. But again, it was 6 months before I told them. And then I didn't receive any kind of support from any of my family members at all. Around the time I was 18, my brother Brent came forward as and said that he had been sexually abused by Warren. And that's ultimately what got the case against Warren rolling. My brother Brent was the first to come forward. And through that, an organization was found. I forget what it's called, but this organization partnered with a uh, psychologist in his practice. And so people that were coming out of the FLDS were able to receive counseling for free. And so I started to go and get counseling, and he diagnosed me with CPTSD,
Yeah.
along that, with the abuse of Marcus, and then the physical and emotional and psychological abuse that I endured from my mother.
Yeah.
She was very abusive, and she's an undiagnosed, in my opinion, covert narcissist.
Yeah.
Nothing is
Sounds like mine.
ever her fault. Yep.
Yeah.
And in fact, when my dad and her split up when I was 16, she quote unquote said to me, I guess you complained about me to your dad one too many times. And so he left me because of you.
So it's your fault. No accountability
Mhm.
for her actions. Yeah.
Yep.
Handed.
Yep. And I
Yeah.
said, I had nothing to do with how your marriage to dad went. And she said, well, you don't have to take all of the blame, but you're going to take some of it. I mean, can you imagine saying that to a 16-year-old girl?
No, but when you got somebody that's a narcissistic mother, they will always, it's always got to be somebody else's fault. And if it is their fault, it's because somebody else has caused that. It's just so standard there as well. And obviously I'm diagnosed with CPTSD as well through exactly the same as yourself there. So I'm really familiar there. And when you go through that, I'm guessing for yourself as well, not that you're expecting it, but you're hoping that the people that caused it will actually take some accountability, even though that you know that they're not. And it's frustrating because you left there feeling that there's no end because nobody's took accountability. So how did you manage to deal with what you'd been through when you started therapy? What kind of therapy was it? Was it just normal talk therapy or
It started off as talk therapy, and then we moved into hypnotherapy as well.
how'd that help?
And it helped tremendously, actually. Not long after my parents split up, and I told them about my abuse, actually, is when the first suicide in our family had occurred. My oldest brother, Clean, it was in January of 2002 that he took his life after he had just struggled his whole life. And actually, through hypnotherapy himself, 18 months prior to his death, he had discovered that he was brutally raped and sodomized by my dad's oldest brothers, and it occurred for years. And his brain had blocked it very much like mine, but it was, mine came out naturally. My brain decided to unlock those memories, but Clayton's came out through hypnotherapy, and it was just more than he could bear. He had
Yeah.
attempted suicide many times before through trying to OD and things like that. And then finally he just put a shotgun in his mouth.
What
One
was he?
evening, he was 28 and he was at home. His wife and his young children found him.
Yeah. He just couldn't take it anymore.
Nope, his wife had tried to hide the guns, and she is from Vietnam, and so English is not her first language. So there was, she was doing the best she could. Could see that he was kind of floundering, and I guess he had actually gone and bought the shotgun because she hid the guns from him, the handguns,
Right.
because she could see he was spiraling. So um, uh, I'm very grateful that I, had the support of a therapist while I was dealing with that. And then also, I was actively in therapy when the second suicide occurred, which was actually Valentine's Day of 2005. My brother David took his life as well. And I was actively in therapy doing hypnotherapy, and that helped a lot to process his death. That one really, Plain was 13 years older than me. And so I wasn't that close with him, didn't really know him all that well. David, he actually, him along with my sister Jenny, raised us during the summer months while our parents were out working. And so he was the heart of our family. Everybody loved and adored him. And so that one really threw us all for a loop. That one really hurt us a lot. And he was also 28 when he took his life. At first, we thought it was a heart attack, secondary to drug overdose, but we realized later that as he was trying to escape a very toxic marriage and a woman that lied to him about her baby being his, and he discovered it wasn't, and just being trapped in a very, very unhealthy marriage, and she wouldn't leave him alone, and that was his only way out.
Do you think living in the cult for a long period of time would have contributed to that as well?
Definitely it did. Again, looking back at our childhood, I didn't realize how toxic it actually was. Our mothers, so Susan is the first wife, and my mother, Sherry, they're full-blooded sisters. And then the third wife was 16 when she was assigned to my dad. And so it just was the toxicity within in our home was palpable. And I think that just bred a lot of animosity, and the kids in the middle were just lost, and we didn't get kids raising kids, and we didn't get the love and attention that we deserved. And our dad was just working as much as he could and trapped in between all these women, and he just didn't know what to do with it. And he told me once that he lived in survival mode for a solid 20 years. All he could think about was going to work and making enough money to support us all. And I mean, from my experience, he was a great dad. He was fun, and we laughed, and he played with us and all that stuff. But I have other siblings that didn't have that great of an experience with him.
Yeah.
And so everybody had their own. And what I've learned through my reading and listening to podcasts is that no two children experience the same parent within a
Yeah.
family system, especially a toxic one.
Yeah, that's so true. Like my upbringing was just I wouldn't wish it on anybody, and I had the worst parents on the planet. My sister, I don't speak to her. I disowned her along with the rest of my family years ago, but she's in denial about the relate that my our mother. She thinks she's the greatest mother in the world. She's absolute living in delusion. The evidence is so overwhelming. Her childhood was different to mine. She never suffered any abuse or anything, but one, it's a different upbringing for her, but two, she won't even look of what was obvious in front of her. That's in denial there as well. So yeah, it is true that it's siblings. You can get two siblings brought up, and one gets all the abuse, one gets like a pretty good childhood there as well. And obviously for yourself, where there's so many of you as well, it was always going to be different for each one of you, I'd imagine.
You're right. Yeah, because there was 20 of us all together, and there was kind of like three generations where the older children were, our parents were super strict, and my dad was coming out of the Vietnam War and was dealing with PTSD that was, later diagnosed. And then the middle kids, we were just lost in the middle, just a number. And then by the time the last five kids rolled around, our parents gave zero fucks.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
doing whatever they wanted. And, Corey, who was actually the third brother to take his life in November of 2022. Again, that one just ripped us all apart because he had been the poster child for mental health. He was in therapy, he was taking medication, yoga, meditation, like all the things, but we knew and that he was struggling with his mental health and had been for a long time. And he had approached his mother when he was 14 and asked, Mom, I'm not doing very well mentally. I need therapy. And he was told that they couldn't afford it, which really chaps my ass because by then my dad was approved for 100% disability through the VA, and they got full medical coverage. And I think it just came back to that his mother didn't want to acknowledge that he was having a
Yeah.
hard time and I had very in-depth conversation with Corey probably about a year and a half before he passed. I asked him if he had been sexually abused as a child or anything. He said he was not, but he was Susan's youngest child. She had 11 children, and he just said he did not get the love and attention that he deserved from her. And the next oldest brother to him, Christopher, I know bullied him pretty significantly and was just
Yeah.
a real bastard to him growing up. And I guess the reason that Christopher, I'm not justifying it, but the reason that Christopher was an asshole was because our dad was an asshole to him.
Yeah.
It's just the repeated cycles which happens over and over and over, especially in polygamous families. And
Yeah.
looking back and the cycles and how they repeated, I know that my mom becoming a narcissist was absolutely because of the childhood trauma that she endured.
Yeah.
Was she sexually abused? No, she was not. But she was raised by parents that didn't give zero fucks about them. My grandmother had 17 children, and my mom was one of the older sisters. And so she was taking care of children, and four of those children were special needs children. And that was placed on the oldest daughters to take care of their younger siblings that were special
Yes.
needs as their mother was just pumping out children as fast as they could. And then my grandfather, by the end of his life, which he passed in December of 2022, he had over 20 wives and over 70 children.
It's just, it's beyond belief. You would think you're telling me a story from like hundreds of years ago, back in the day. People didn't
I
know
know.
this, and yeah, it's just, this is like current, recent past, current
Mhm.
times still going
Yeah.
on. And I don't, it amazes me. I don't know, maybe it's 'cause I'm a therapist and I had tons of therapy, but at what point do these people that do this think that it's a good idea and their children are going to have the best upbringing and be stable and secure? What does it not enter their head?
Doesn't enter their heads because religion is the number one most important thing. And how you get to the highest, so there's three levels of heaven in their version. And in order to get to the highest level of heaven, you have to have a minimum of three wives. And the more children, it's almost like the more children that you have, the more entrance tickets that you get, more chances you get to get into the highest level of, I'm not
The
shitting
more
you, dude.
raffle tickets you got, it,
Hmm. Yeah. And so they're just pumping out kids as fast as they can and they don't even care. My grandfather, Wayman, was 87 years old when he fathered his youngest child with a woman that was young enough to be his not great granddaughter. She was in her 20s when they got married, but she was assigned that, like, because he was on the priesthood council, it was believed that it was an honor to marry somebody of that stature within the community. Yeah. But she was in her early 20s when she married him and she had, I think, three children with him. And yeah, the
but like
youngest was,
that guy could live to be 100, but his kids are still not going to grow up with a father and they're going to pay the price. The list goes on. At what point is that a good idea? If there's no thought for the actual children. Most people think, can we afford one kid, two kids? How can we raise them? It's just like, it's like they're an afterthought.
mhm,
It's
yep,
like, it's
there's
almost like it's
no,
like a currency sort of thing.
mhm, yep, absolutely. The more wives and the more children you have, the higher you are thought of in regards in the community.
And it's so tragic. You've had your 20, was it 20 siblings?
There's,
Five you've lost to taking their own life.
yes.
And what happened to the other two? Because it all, so far, the three you spoke about, they all sound, none of it was like an impulse. It all sounds like they just mentally checked out. They couldn't take anything any longer. They all
Hmm.
sound the same, whatever the variation or the root cause is.
And that's what led me to my own. I've survived three attempts myself. And it just came down to I did not want to be here anymore. I could not take it any longer. My first attempt, I only survived because I didn't know about a safety switch. And when I flicked the switch and put the gun back to my head, my sister walked out and found me. Again, was not offered any support. I was 19. I probably should have been checked into a hospital, was not. Nobody ever spoke to me about it. I was just left again. Everything with me that really just it makes me so angry is because I was left to deal with it on my own.
Yeah.
Whereas with Brent, when he came forward about his abuse against Warren, but because Warren was public enemy number one, everybody touted and he was so brave for coming forward. Oh my gosh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm like, I'm over here. Well, what the fuck about me?
Yeah.
But because it was my own brother, no, it had to remain a dirty family secret. And so so over the course of my first attempt was in September of 2004. And then my second and third attempt were within 48 hours of each other, and they were in October of 2006. So
2006.
I was 21 at the time, and I don't remember, I don't think there was anything necessarily like bad that triggered it or anything. I just was tired of being here, and I had fully committed. I was done with life. And I had some partial bottles left over from some surgeries of narcotics.
Yeah.
I took those. Did I already tell you this? I apologize.
No.
Okay. So I swallowed those bottles, and I had also gone to Lowe's and picked up for a hardware store and picked up a box of rat poison. And I proceeded to shovel handfuls of rat poison in my mouth.
You really wanted to make sure this time.
Yes, I had written my letters. I was fully committed and wanted to go. And halfway through the night, as I obviously was not dying, I got a knife, and I actually still have the scar. I was trying to dig into my wrists, but it was the knife was not sharp enough to cause any real damage. And then I got up the next, finally went to sleep and got up the next morning and went to work.
Yeah. Did anyone know about it?
I did tell he's my husband now, but we were just dating at the time, boyfriend, girlfriend, and I did tell him, and he begged me not to try again. I told him, I says, look, you've got a choice here. Because I was fully committed. I said, here's the deal. You can tell someone, you can have me committed. I'll wait. I'll do whatever they tell me to do. I'll get out and I'll do it again. So you can either let me do this my way, or you can wait. Either way, you're going to lose me. And my husband is a very strong man, and he does not cry. And he said that he left my apartment that night and sobbed the entire 40 minutes home because he didn't think he was ever going to see me again. And that night I tried again, and I swallowed 33 Lunesta sleeping pills, which are stronger than Ambien. And halfway through the night, several times through that night, as I think probably going to drift off into a coma, it felt like somebody was shocking me with a defibrillator. And I would wake up and I was just, what the fuck? And that happened 3 or so times that night. And I felt the presence of Clayton and David with me. They were there. And around 4 o'clock in the morning, I was sobbing. I was angry that I wouldn't die. And I called George, my husband, and I said, why won't I just die? And I was just sobbing. And he says, try to get some sleep. I'll come get you in the morning. And I think I got a few hours of sleep. And I was still taking that many sleeping pills. I was high. And I'll never forget, it was Halloween. And he came and picked me up, and I just went to work. He was the only one that knew, and we didn't have a lot of money. It's not like I could call in sick or anything like that. Same with him. So I think he just brought me to work because we worked in the same department, because he could keep an eye on me.
Yeah.
And I don't recall probably getting much work done that day. And we worked in a call center, so it wasn't a high stress job. But so yeah, he did the best he could. And through that next week, I had to then pass that rat poison, which was incredibly painful. As it worked through my system, I had violent stomach cramps for days. And not only the narcotics, the rat poison, the sleep, just there. So I had just the week before I did this, I had started to see a new therapist, and I went back after these 2 attempts a week later, and he's like, I'm so happy to see you here. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, I knew, because I had told him what I had done. He's like, yeah, I know. I was like, how did you know? And he's like, I just knew. And I said, well, how would you have known if I'd taken my life? And he said, I was checking the obituaries.
He was that worried
Yeah.
about you?
Yes. And he said, I knew you were committed to doing it. And he said, I knew there was nothing I could do to stop you, but I'm very happy you're still here. And he said, and I never went to the doctor. I never got checked out. And he said, that there's no medical reason that you're still here today. You know that, right? And he said,
Yeah.
sounds about right. And so by then I realized I was not meant to die by my own hand. And so I was like, I'm just going to plug along and work hard in therapy and do the best that I could. And when I did, eventually pull myself out of it. And still, all this time, I was never on any antidepressants, nothing. I just raw dogged this shit for years.
What would you say? I mean, that's somebody that really means to do it. You get people. I mean, it annoys me when somebody like my terrible mother will go, someone so tried to come out. It's just a cry for help. And
Mhm.
as a therapist, it enrages me because, yeah, it's a cry for help. Somebody's crying out to be helped, whereas somebody like her would just dismiss that person. Well, I didn't really mean it and carry on. But you really went all out to do that. And out of 100 people that done that, 99 of them, you're the one that survived. Yeah. So you've got to that point for that long because it wouldn't have just been a snap decision. This has been coming for a long time. And then you're like, well, even this can't work. So something's got to change. What did you do to change that? How did you change the belief system? Because that was the last attempt, wasn't it?
The last like major one where I actually took steps and to be here. I still struggle with the thoughts to this day,
Yeah.
especially, Monroe, he's brother number 5. He took his life in March of this year. Each time there's a death, I just think, yeah, it would be so much easier if I just wasn't here.
Yeah, it's because I researched like suicide, obviously being a therapist, and it's very common generational. And if you got like a family member that's done it, it almost gives justifiability and permission for somebody else to go, that's okay, I can do it. And when you've got the insanity of what's going on in your family, of people taking their lives, psychologically, somebody that's struggling might feel that it's easier to do it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It causes a ripple effect. My family
Yeah.
has proven that over and over. Um, and I just, before I had children, I've lost years of my life because I disassociated so hard. I know I was in school, I was in college full time, working full time. So I think I just kept myself busy. I made sure I went to therapy and I just worked really hard on myself and stayed busy. And I found that if I stayed busy, then I could keep the thoughts at bay. And I just went on about life that way. My husband and I eventually bought a house together. We moved in together. I graduated from college and I didn't want to have children because coming from where I came from and basically
Yeah.
helping take care of children for so long and helping my sister raise their children, I didn't want to have children. And then my husband sprung it on me after 5 or 6 years together that he wanted to have children. I'm like, well, I need to think about that. And so I thought about it and we did eventually start trying and we did conceive our sweet baby girl. And she was born in November of 2011. And I'll tell you what, that sweet little soul
Yeah.
has given me so much purpose. And then surprise baby number 2 came just 2 years later, and our son, and they're my purpose, and I know that they are why I keep going,
Yeah.
and I'm so grateful for them. They are the sweetest, kindest little kid. They're not little anymore. They're 12 and 14 now, but they're the reason why I'm sitting here today because after Corey Corey died in November of 2022. 6 weeks later, my maternal grandfather died of old age at 97. 2 weeks later, my dad died of cancer. And then I think it was about 2.5 months later, brother number 4, Brandon, took his life in April of 2023. So we
Well,
had 4 deaths in less than 5 months.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Brandon's death was the hardest for me to process because we didn't get to see his body. My brother, oldest brother, took over funeral arrangements and had his body cremated before we could say goodbye. Whereas with all the other bodies, particularly Corey, in the manner in which he took his life, they covered his entire body, but they left his hands and his feet exposed. So what people need to know is that when somebody dies tragically and unexpectedly, it is very important for your brain to see that body to make the connection that they're gone. And we didn't get to have that with Brandon. And so I still to this day I forget that he's gone. And then I'll have something that'll trigger me and it'll remind me that he's gone. And it just has been really hard for me to process his death. But also him and I had a very similar experience growing up. We were the forgotten children in the middle, and so there was, I'm sure, some trauma bonding that had happened, but
Yeah. Yeah.
he was the person that could relate to me the most in his experience within our family. And he refused to go to therapy to face his demons. Again, I don't know if he had been sexually abused as a child. He couldn't have hard conversations. If you tried to have a deep, meaningful conversation with him, he would just brush it off. He was always very jovial and outgoing, but just he just couldn't get his down to that vulnerable level. It was too hard for him. So he was obviously dealing with some things, and he left a suicide note in his car, and it said, "You got what you wanted," and then the number four, because we could see that he was struggling, but at that point we were all just trying, we were drowning in grief. We were trying to show up
Yeah.
for each other, but we were barely able to save ourselves. When you can't
Yeah.
even save yourself, how can you save someone else?
Yeah. I'm
And I
always,
could see it in his eyes the last time I saw him, just the sadness in his eyes. It was very apparent. It was what, a week before he took his life. And
were you worried about him at the time that that might happen?
we honestly believe, we knew that he was struggling, but we honestly believe, because when Corey died, we all stood in a circle and we all swore it would never happen again. Because Corey was 28 as well. So Clayton, David, and Corey were all 28 when they took their lives. And Corey specifically waited until he was 28 to take his life. I don't know why. But we all swore it would never happen again. And so we honestly believe that Brandon would not do that to us again, especially after we just lost Corey and Dad. We just didn't believe he had the courage to do it, and he disappeared for a week before he disappeared. We couldn't find him. The police wouldn't help us much because he was an adult, and we're like it was just horrible. But they were not much help at all, and they finally discovered his body under a snowbank up the canyon. And so I got really in a dark place after that, trying to process all the grief and the death. And it was Easter Sunday of 2023, and the thoughts would not leave my brain. And so
Of course.
I wrote my letters, and I had sent George and the kids away to go to dinner at my cousin's house, and I attempted to find the guns. And after Corey took his life, my husband had hidden the guns in one location in the house, and then the ammunition in another place, and I wasn't able to find the guns. And so I was like, okay, fine. Then I went to write my letter. And I was really, really mad that I could not find the guns, really mad. And I decided to put that on pause, and was like, okay, I'll write my letter to my children. And that's when I couldn't do it.
What's going through your mind? What's going through your mind at the time?
I was so tired and exhausted, and I couldn't take another loss, but I couldn't write the letter to my children. I couldn't do that to them. I knew that that would crush their little souls, and they would
Yeah.
never be the same.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
They would
Of course.
never ever be the same. And I have a very dear friend, her dad took his life when she was 17, and here it's over 30 years later, and it
Yeah.
still affects her.
You never fully recover with suicide. Obviously, I deal with as a therapist when people never fully recover, and no matter what the circumstances, somebody takes it like they always somehow manage to blame themselves somehow. Well, maybe this or that, and they take it with them, and after they won't let it go. Yeah, yeah. So
Especially young children, where if I wasn't enough for my mom to stay here, then I will never be
yeah,
enough.
you get the kids then get abandonment. They get
Mhm.
abandonment, and then it goes on into life where they can make bad choices throughout their life, and that. And so it's. But I'll get the exhausting times for yourself, for anyone, and what you've been through is just. You know, if you put it into a movie, people are like, yeah, we can cut most of this out. You can't have all that in there. You know, give us 10% of it, and we can have a story. But the rest of it, it's just, you know, I mean, for me, when I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I'm like, you know, it feels exhausting just listening to it. It is the question that's going through my head the whole time is ask her about her strength. Where does she get her strength from? Because how often in your life have you been on empty and yet you've still got through it? That's your real strength. So how have you managed to do this?
I honestly don't know. Genuinely, I don't know, because people have
Yeah.
been telling me that my whole life. You are so strong. And I think it really just it stems from not having anybody in my corner as a child. After the third wife, Martha, left and she took her three daughters with her, her oldest daughter, Jessica, was just a year older than me, and we were inseparable. And after she left, we didn't have any more contact with her. And my siblings, some of them that were just a few years old, were really awful to me. And I felt alone. And so I really had to find inner strength from 8, 9 years old to survive.
Yeah.
And it was an adaptation that I didn't even know that I had developed. And really I think those, and then, at 14 and 15 being left alone to deal with that trauma, being abused, it was just a systematic over and over and over being left to deal with it on my own. And I didn't have anybody to support me, so I could only rely on myself.
Yeah.
And each time I've had to pull myself out of it, as I was dealing with the grief and of losing so many family members all at once. George was there and he was present and he stepped up and he was cooking and cleaning and doing all the things, but he didn't know how to, nobody did. Nobody knew
Nobody's
how to
gonna.
be
No.
like, nobody knew what to do for us. We
No.
were just drowning.
Yeah.
And so I spent months in bed. I'd
Yeah.
go days without showering, brushing I just stopped caring. And I just had to slowly pull myself out of it when I, decided that I wasn't going to go through with taking my life because of my kids. The thoughts they were still present. And I remember my husband and I were sitting at a gas station and he had gone in to get something and I saw like dump truck, a massive truck drive by. And I thought, oh, I could just step in front of that. And then I'd be like, okay, where's the nearest train track? So then when I was realizing that I couldn't get access to a gun, then my brain was trying to think of other ways. And then at that point, I was like, okay, now it's time. And there had actually been, my doctor had called in a prescription for antidepressants. And I went ahead and went and picked that up.
Yeah.
And just a very low dose. It's just enough to take the edge off. But it's, for me, it is an active everyday choice that I have to make to want to be here, to want
Yeah.
to live, to survive, to be here for my children. It is an active everyday choice that I have to make.
I don't doubt that for a second, because look at your life that you've been through. Look at the mental strain, the obviously CPTSD. How many days have been traumatic for you, mentally exhausting there. So you're going to get to a point where you have to battle through every day because your brain is formed in that way to deal with trauma, all of the things that you've been through there as well. So it's kind of no surprise. And the only thing is that whether you know where it's come from or not, somehow you've got this pretty much unbelievable amount of strength, because how many other people would still be here now talking, doing what you're doing, that's been through your set of circumstances? The vast majority of them would have probably been long gone years ago, decades ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've had a number of psychologists tell our family that, and myself too. It's absolutely uncanny that you guys are all. And she heads a grief counseling group, and I reached out to her to attend, and I explained to her about losing 4 family members, and she's like, this just happened 2 months ago. And I was like, Brandon's death. And I said, yeah. And she's like, and you're up and functioning? I'm like, yeah. What else is there to do? She's like, most people lose one person and they are not functioning for at least a year. So
Yeah.
that, the fact that you've just lost 4 family members in such a short time just speaks to your strength. And that's
Yeah.
when I really, for the first time, was like, okay, I guess
Yeah.
I am strong.
Yeah,
So
that's unbelievable strength. I don't think it's something that you can just build. I think it's that X factor. That's something you've either got it or you don't, and you're probably that tiny percentage that's just got it. It's almost, even through your toughest days, some unlimited amount of strength. That doesn't mean that it means it's easy and you can deal with it and get through it. It means that when you're on rock bottom, absolutely on zero, you still get through the day, you still get through the week, you still carry on. That's the strength, you know.
and even if that means I stay in bed, and I did for a long time. And there are days, after Monroe died and I flew back to Utah I handled all the funeral arrangements for him by myself, even though he was a brother that I did not particularly care for.
Sure.
But I did that for my mom, and I got back because I was taking care of my mom and everything else. And I slept for 3 days
Yeah.
straight when I got back. And I did not leave my bedroom for 7 days
Yeah. I think you
because I
needed
was
that
so
just to recover.
exhausted.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't doubt that for a sec. And it's good that you actually listen to your body and your brain and actually accept it and go, you know what? I'll see you in a week's time. So I need to get some energy back, not try and like just carry on with it. You just can't do it.
Yeah, I have gotten to that point where I know to listen to my body, and if I don't, and I actually ended up with a kidney infection. Part of the reason
Yeah.
why I was so tired is
Yeah.
my body, excuse me, my body forces me, I get sick. If I don't take the time to rest, my body's like, well, here, we're going to give you this to force you to slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just an active everyday choice to show up. And then as I've started to tell my story, and it's making a difference for other people, I just never in a million years thought that people would care. But it's giving other people
Uh,
strength. And it's, I
yeah,
don't know.
it's your story. It can relate to so many people on so many levels. Not so much the cult thing, but whether it's like narcissistic mother, sibling rivalry, obviously the abuse there is. I mean, the list goes on. So anyone that listens to your story that's been through some level of trauma or adversity, there's going to be something they can relate to you for you, just on the
Yeah.
fact you've been through so much. What made you come out and start telling your story? Because you do an amazing podcast with the lovely Lisa Sugarman.
Uh, Actually, so I started kind of becoming more public about it after Brandon died, and I recorded a podcast video, or excuse me, a TikTok video. I'd never been on podcast, or excuse me, TikTok, and I just recorded this ugly crying video. It was just days after Brandon had passed, and I recorded it and put it up there. I just wanted people to see what like it looks like on the other side of suicide,
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
does to the family members. And I recorded it, put my phone down, and I was the next day going to get on and delete it because I was like, how could I put this video out there? And the comments section was just unreal. The amount of kindness and support, I just couldn't believe it. But the one that stuck out the most to me was there was a person on there, a girl, and she says, I have been thinking about suicide for months, but after seeing this, I don't know now. And so I thought, okay, if I could save one person, that's good enough for me. And so I just continued to show up on TikTok here or there and share my story. And I came across a channel called My Suicide Story. His name's Joe, and I interviews people that have attempted suicide. And I put in my submission in 2023. Completely forgot about it. I actually stopped posting on TikTok and just kind of went about my life. And um, my husband and I had moved to Virginia in 2015, and then we moved back to Utah in 22 after all the death and everything. I was like, I gotta go. I can't stay here because the toxic family cycles were just continuing to repeat. And I knew I told George, I said, if we stay here, I won't make it to my 40th birthday. I will be next. And so we've got to get out. And so we ended up moving back to Virginia. And we got here in January of this year. And I was doing really, really, really good, was just fully committed to being the best version of myself. I had heard rumblings of Monroe threatening to commit suicide. He was a severe alcoholic, would not get any help, would not go to rehab. And then we got the call on March 16th that he had taken his life. And that just every time there's a death, it's like a gaping wound. And every time the bandage just gets ripped off, the hole gets bigger, and it sends me on and all of us on a tailspin.
Yeah.
And it's usually about 90 days that then I can finally start to see through the fog. And that was in, I think, July of this year. And Joe from My Suicide Story reached out to me and he was like, oh my God. And I said, oh, by the way, we've had brother number 5. And I was on the phone with him for an hour and he's like, when are you available? So we did a similar situation to this where he just recorded me. And was the first time I didn't share all of everything, but I shared about my brothers and then my suicide attempts. And it was really hard. That was my first interview. It was
Yeah.
really raw, really emotional. And then he introduced me to Lisa
Yeah.
Sugarman, and she is the was the co-host of the Survivors podcast, and her partner at the time, after 2 seasons, had to step away. And I connected with Lisa, and we had been talking. And I was originally just going to appear as a guest,
Yeah.
and she's like, "I Gretchen has to step away. Would you be my co-host?" And I was like, absolutely, yes. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even have to think about it. And we launched our pod, relaunched, rebranded, and launched at the end of, I believe it was October. And I started posting more on social media, TikTok, and I've grown on TikTok. I've over 5,000 additional followers since then, posting every day. And just people reaching out and messaging me, telling me they've listened to the podcast. Thank you so much. I have a friend that he shared it with his 2 family members that were suicidal. And he said it helped them to hear my story because this season 3, we're really focusing on sharing my story and getting it out there, and it's really helping people. And
Yeah.
I feel
Oh,
so honored. You're so welcome. I appreciate you listening, and anybody listening, just please know that you are loved, you are enough, and
hey.
you are strong.